Many say that the Eyrie of House Arryn is the most beautiful castle in all of Westeros. A subjective opinion, but it's hard to deny the truth of the claim, much to the ear of House Tyrell and Highgarden. 7 slim, white towers crown the Eyrie where it sits high upon the shoulder of the Giant's Lance, and no castle in Westeros boasts more marble in its walls or upon its floors. And yet the Arryns and the Men of the Vale will tell you that the Eyrie is impregnable as well, for its position high atop the mountainside makes it all but impossible to assault by conventional means. The smallest of the royal seats of Westeros, the Eyrie was not originally the seat of House Arryn. That honour belongs to the Gates of the Moon, a much larger castle that stands at the foot of the Giant's Lance, on the very site where artist Arryn and his Andals made camp on the night before the Battle of the Seven Stars. Still uncertain on his throne in the early years of his reign, King Artus wanted a seat strong enough to withstand a siege and storm, should the first men rise against him. The Gates of the Moon served well enough in that regard, but it was more of a fort than a palace meant for a king, and those seeing it for the first time have been known to remark that the castle of the Gates of the Moon is fine for a lesser lord. This did not trouble King Artus. If history is to be believed, he was seldom even there. The first Arryn king spent most of his reign on horseback, riding from one end of his domain to the next in an unending royal progress. "My throne is made of saddle leather," he was wont to say, "and my castle is a tent." King Artus was succeeded by his 2 eldest sons, who reigned in turn as the second and third kings of the Mountain and the Vale. Unlike their father, they spent considerable portions of their reign at the Gates of the Moon, and seemed content there, though each of them commanded certain additions to the castle. It was the 4th Arryn king, the grandson of Artus, who began the process that resulted in the building of the Eyrie. Roland Arryn had been fostered with an Andal king in the Riverlands as a boy, and had travelled widely after winning his knight's spurs, visiting Oldtown and Lannisport, before returning to the Vale upon his father's death to don the Falcon Crown. Having seen the wonders of the Hightower in Oldtown and Casterly Rock, and the great castles of the first men that still dotted the lands of the Trident, he felt that the Gates of the Moon looked mean and ugly by comparison. King Roland's first impulse was to tear down the gates and build his new seat upon the same site, but that winter thousands of wildlings descended from the mountains in search of food and shelter, for the high valleys had become buried deep by snowfalls. Their desperation brought home to the king how vulnerable his seat was at its present site. Legend claims it was his future wife, Lord Hunter's daughter Tiora, who reminded him of how his grandfather had defeated Robar Royce by attacking from the high ground. Much taken by the girl's words, and by the girl herself, King Roland resolved to see the highest ground of all, and decreed the building of a castle that would become the Eyrie. As Ronald knew from the onset, he did not live to see it completed. The task his grace had set his builders was a daunting one, for the lower slopes of the Giant's Lance were steep and overgrown, and higher up the bare stones of the mountain became perilous and icy. More than a decade was spent just clearing the winding switchback roads up the mountainside. Beyond the trees, a small army of stonemasons were set to work with hammers and chisels to carve out the steps to ease the ascent where the slopes grew too steep. Meanwhile, Roland sent his builders across the 7 kingdoms in search of stone, for the king was not pleased with the look of the marble available to him in the Vale. In time came another winter, and another. Taken unawares by a band of painted dogs, King Roland Arryn was pulled from his horse and murdered, his skull smashed by a stone maul as he tried to free his longsword from its scabbard. He reigned for 26 years, just long enough to see the first stones laid for the castle he had started. Building continued through the reign of his son and his son's son, but progress painfully slow, for all the marble had to be brought up in ships from Tarth, then carried up the side of the Giant's Lance by mules. Dozens of mules died whilst making the ascent, along with 4 common workmen and a master stonemason. Slowly the castle walls began to rise, foot by foot, until the Falcon Crown passed to the great-grandson of the king who had first dreamed of the castle in the sky. War and wenches were the passion of King Roland II, not building. The cost of the Eyrie had become prohibitive, and the new king needed gold to pay for his campaign in the Riverlands that he was planning. Hardly had his father been laid to rest, then King Roland II commanded a halt to the work on the castle. Thus it came to pass that the Eyrie was abandoned to the skies for a better part of 4 years. Falcons roosted amongst the half-completed towers, whilst King Roland II fought the first men in the Riverlands in search of gold and glory. Conquest, however, proved harder to achieve than he had anticipated. After several small, meaningless victories over petty kings, he found himself facing Christopher IV, the Hammer of Justice. The last truly great king of the First Men handed Roland Arryn a shattering defeat, then served him a worse one the following year. In peril of his life, his grace fled to the castle, an Andal lord, only to be betrayed and delivered back to Christopher in chains. 4 years after riding forth from the Vale in splendor, King Roland II was beheaded at Oldstones by the Hammer of Justice. Few mourned the passing of King Roland in the Vale, where his belligerence and vainglory had won him no friends. When his brother Robin Arryn succeeded him, work on the Eyrie was resumed. Yet it was 43 years and 4 kings later before the castle was finally completed and fit for habitation. Maester Quince, the first maester to serve there, declared the Eyrie to be the most splendid work ever built by the hands of men, a palace worthy of the gods themselves. From then on, the Eyrie has remained the seat of House Arryn in the spring, summer and autumn. In winter, ice and snow and howling winds make the ascent impossible, and the castle itself uninhabitable. But in the summer, the castle is bathed by cool, fresh mountain breezes, a welcome refuge from the sweltering heat of the valley floor below. There is no other castle like it in all of the world, or at least none that have been recorded that matches it. The series of defences makes the approach to the Eyrie difficult enough. But even should the attacker overcome each of these way castles in turn, he would then find himself at the base of a sheer cliff, with the Eyrie itself still perched 600 feet above him, reachable only by winch or ladder. Small wonder then that few serious efforts have ever been made to besiege the Eyrie. Since its completion, the Arryn kings have always known they had an impregnable fortress in which to take refuge if hard pressed. The maesters who have served House Arryn, students of the art of warfare, have all been unanimous in their belief that the castle cannot be taken, save perhaps with dragons, as Visenya Targaryen once proved when she landed in the Eyrie's inner yard on her dragon, Vhagar, and persuaded the mother of the last Arryn king to submit to House Targaryen and yield up the Falcon Crown.